Okay, so actually in these next 2 days, we're doing a lot of the content side of things. And then we get out and we talk and we walk and we consider about what this really means. We haven't done this before in a collective session. You know, we have come to some cities, we've come to Rotterdam, in fact. And in fact, we started off saying to Rotterdam, we want to talk to you for a couple of hours about these 8 steps. And after maybe about half an hour, and we were on the first step, we said, hang on a minute, I think we're going to do this differently. We need more time. And actually, this is the beginning of sort of all reflecting on that, recognizing that it does take time to go through a process, and we need to give it time. But I'm also conscious that all of you are probably, if you're like me, a bit impatient and you want the answers now. You know, why do we wait until 2.5 years before we actually then have all the 8 steps clear? We know what to do, and all we've got to do is then we start, you know, in 2.5 years' time. So we've been reflecting and thinking about the fact that actually today is an opportunity to tell you everything, as much as we can, give you the whole story. But these answers aren't necessarily your answers. They're a framework. They're a process and something that I hope will help, because we've worked with lots of different people, and these steps that we suggest might be helpful are the sorts of things where we see people who follow them seem to have had more impact. They seem to have had more success with it when they've delivered their policies, if they've been through these steps. Doesn't mean you have to start at step 1 and finish at step 8 either. We've got lots of examples where people have only done 1 or 2 or maybe only 3 steps, and not necessarily, maybe they started at step 8. And I know that doesn't help you. But what I do want to share with you in just this introduction is recognizing that actually, if you understand the whole concept, what we're trying to do here and what we've been trying to do, we've been going at Walk21, Carlos and I, for a couple of years, but before that, we've been doing it for 25 years. We think that there's a systemized way that we can approach walking and walking policy. That means that this formula could be at least a starting point to ask yourselves, are we doing enough? Could we be doing more? And I think the challenge that we find everywhere we go, anywhere in the world, is that everybody's doing it. You know, we've seen these slides already just now from Andreas sharing us the actual data that gets taught here in Burgenland, in Austria even. And it doesn't look like there's very much walking going on, you know, and it doesn't quite make sense. And it's because, although it is happening, there are people walking, and it's sort of basically invisible. And there's a policy blindness very often, which is obviously at the heart of this project, to try and overcome. But it's because we just assume it. We don't necessarily plan for it. And this is the challenge that we have, that you have, that we're working on. So just to run through these 8 steps, just to remind you of the framework, because it's been some time since we were together and thinking about this project. Step 1 that we're going to be talking about in a minute is about commitment. And we know that if we think about who is committed and who should or would help to also be committed, it does help getting everybody on the right side, ideally at the beginning. Sometimes it's at the end, I do say, but because you've worked out everything, and then you can say, do you believe in this too? But actually at the beginning, I think it could be helpful. That's why we're going to talk about this. What is it that they're committing to? It doesn't have to be that complicated, but I would suggest that keeping people walking already, you know, whatever the numbers might be, I think everybody is doing some walking almost every day. They may or may not realize it, it may not get counted in surveys, but there's actually, most people are doing it. And so, but keeping them doing it is the challenge. And that includes making sure that they feel protected from getting hurt in whatever way that might be, about safety or security, and enabling people to actually think about the accessibility, about the comfort, inclusion, so that people feel like they can enjoy it. and that's it. We can stop here. But actually visions sometimes get a bit more confusing than that, or we sort of think, how do those things actually relate? And what would that mean that we actually do? What do we commit to? And who's responsible for that? Whose job is retaining? Whose job is protection? Maybe, okay, there might be somebody who's got a safety remit. Accessibility, comfort. Has anybody actually got is that in your job description? Any of these words? Comfort. You do want to look after people. It's good, because these things are changing all the time. And our second step when we go to Prague will be to just give you a thought about is to look at research. What do we know already? And if we don't know it yet, what do we need to know? And I'm hoping that the conversations we have over the next few days will really help you think, yeah, are we asking the right questions? Because we know that there's gaps. We've started asking questions here in Burgenland, and we found some very helpful data. But actually, we're now thinking, okay, what do we do with this knowledge? So that leads us quite nicely to this third step that sort of says, okay, we'll need to think about not just this sort of action research, and it could be about involving communities, but we actually have to talk to people at some point. There's a lot you can do on a GIS. There's a lot you can study about the environment, but talking to people and thinking about what they like and what they don't like is actually critical. And so actually, I think we'll be in Rotterdam with you, Karen and Jose, talking about involving communities, and it's something you've done a lot of. But there are also challenges about involving communities, because often it's the people who come forward who want to be involved might mask the fact that there's a lot of people who need to be involved, who maybe are quite hard to find or hard to reach, difficult to include. So we'll be thinking a bit more about that. And Carlos will be sharing some information about this, which we've been using a little bit here in Burgenland, but I hope that we'll be collecting some data in all of your places to actually get a sense of how people feel in your communities. So we can think about that. Step 4, moving this through quite quickly. Where will we be for step 4? I'm thinking Vilnius. Thank you. We're coming over to you, and we'll be looking at environments, assessing the environment. You know, it feels like this is probably the stuff we know well, but if you look online or you search for how to do a walking audit, there are 30, maybe 40 different tools out there. Last year, we had our conference in Kigali in Rwanda. We had 40 people submit papers saying that they wanted to share their system about walking audits. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is exploding. We need to think a little bit about that. I want to help you about what is the right thing to measure. How do we evaluate things? You know, there are some people now measuring 200-300 different things. That can be paralyzing if we're not careful. So we need to think about how to assess the environment theme. And really at the heart of this, I showed you this slide before, if you remember, for those who weren't there, what we really want to know is this relationship between what are people actually doing, you know, if people are walking or not, and what that walkability is like, you know, how does it feel? And the strategy that is in place is actually something that we need to build around our policy that says we want to make sure that everyone's in that top right corner, ideally, that we've got people that are walking and it's walkable. But you'll know that there are areas of your neighborhoods, your towns, maybe even one street against another street or one side of the road compared to another road that's more walkable or it's got more people walking on it than the other side. And why is that? And what can we do about that? And what's the strategy for that? This is a picture here on the left. In theory, according to Google, this is the most walkable street in Europe. Do you know where it is? Has anyone been there? It's in Paris, apparently. Somewhere in the back of Paris, by the look of it. And it is beautiful, to be fair, but I couldn't help but realise there's nobody in it. And the other challenge on the other side of this picture here are some streets in Hong Kong, absolutely packed with people. We worked in Hong Kong for 3 years, and I said, but why do you need our help? You've got one of the highest levels of walking in the world. You've got this much. You've got 98% of people walking and using public transport. Isn't that what you all want? Wouldn't that be great if you had that in Burgenland? But they said to us, yeah, we have. but we hate it. It's the worst part of our day is when we're on our feet walking to work, getting off the train and we've got to somehow or other negotiate to get to the front door of the office or get back home again. So it's not just about the numbers. And this is what this chart, which we just thought about a couple of years ago, working with some work with WHO, World Health Organization, realized that, yeah, this is the matrix that we need to reflect. We have to understand about the environment and also about behavior, and the interrelationship with that is really what we're getting a grip on. And so step 5 is realizing that if we start to get a grip on all this data and understand what people want and think about it, we now need to review about what policies, standards and things already exist that might actually be limiting the fact that we aren't giving it enough priority at the moment. In Germany, for example, the Environment Department 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, wrote a very nice policy called a national walking strategy. But all the actions were left to the Transport Department to do. They weren't so happy with that, as you can imagine. 3 years later, the Transport Department are now writing a national strategy for walking. But one of the challenges is that actually most of the money in the Transport Department is spent investing in roads. And it's not a usual thing. And so they've got some legal challenges about the way that the legal framework is set up in the country that makes it quite difficult to give more priority to walking. It's going to take time to overcome. And let's look at your policies. You know, these are the ones, and tomorrow we'll be diving a bit deeper into this. Ultimately, this project wants to help with these documents and think about how we could improve them. We've been, well, Carlos especially, and you're going to get to know Carlos very well. He's put his head into your policies one at a time for hours and hours. And he's really tried to get familiar with what the words say. But you need to tell us whether or not those words are enough, or where they need strengthening, and how we can help. And so step 6 is about planning. I'm not going to explain all this, but just because this is all the stuff that's coming up in the next year or so. But, you know, there are examples out here now, which I want to suggest to you that we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper. Even in the year 2020, well, since the year 2020, you know that now 62% of countries have a national walking strategy. How many do you think have a national policy for cycling? More or less? More? Yeah. Alex, do you remember the number? It's 24%. 24% of countries have a cycling policy. 62% have a walking policy. And that's because of COVID. Yeah, I think. Everybody is now writing this stuff down. And the policy is coming thick and fast. We could hardly catch up. And this is our opportunity to lead as regions and cities, and also tell governments what you think they should be doing at a national level to help you. Well, yeah, what do you want? We need to think about that. So step 7 then is get on with it and think about it and maybe invest in something, make a change. What would that be in Burgenland? I've got some ideas. We'll talk about them with the governor when they arrive. We'll see what they might say. What would be the thing that you would say, well, actually, if we could do that, that would make a massive difference. There'll be something here. And the trouble is, I've got about 10 ideas to think about. We'll have to think, what is the right thing to do here? And there's lots of examples. I'm not going to go into it, but right now, but ultimately what it comes down to, and sometimes people start here, Ireland, you know, they started with the money. They decided to allocate €1 million a day to walking and cycling without a policy. And it took a couple of years before they could even spend it, because actually they needed to get organised. They needed to employ people, train them, come up with priorities, develop the design guidance, roll it out the door. You know, you can tell us the story later. So it's interesting that step 8 is then, once we understand everything, we know everything, we've talked to everyone, we've got everyone committed, then we get the money and off we go. But actually, sometimes you start with step 8. Isn't that interesting? And it's not wrong, because actually, 2 years later, 2.5 years later, they're spending at least that $1 million. And they're now saying, but why is it only 1 million? Wouldn't it be nice to have 1 million a day? But how much is enough? You know, in some countries, the United Nations is saying you should put 33% of your budget into walking and cycling in Africa. That's what they're saying. That's the target number, 33%. 33% of your transport budget. Do you actually know what that is? Maybe look it up. So the point being, there's a process. We're going to help you. And they're not necessarily in order, but we're here to help. And what follows now, in a quick sense, it is something that not necessarily I need you to write down detail after detail, but is hopefully reassuring that this systemized approach to the fact that we can follow a set of steps, we can set some common objectives and goals, and focus and target actions in a common framework that has and delivers measurable impact. It's the things that we've been working on for 5-10 years in a way that we want to share with you as a sort of an approach. And Carlos, maybe I'll ask you to say this slide because, Carlos, you've got the academic background to walking. You are 99.9% towards a PhD on walking and walking.
I need to defend you.
One last step to go. I'd love to be able to say that you are Dr. Carlos and I could introduce you, but I have to hold off. But explain the science behind this because it's useful to understand this, and you might have to just step slightly over here. And there's 2 slides, this one and then the next.
Whereas basically this is what we call a socio-ecological framework. And it's for research in walkability, and it's to understand why people walk or what makes people walk. If you go one step before, what makes a city walkable, and it has like different types of environments. Let's say they're all very interrelated, and they all somehow influence our pedestrians. So at the very beginning, you have what we call environmental determinants, and that would be the place under study, which can be broken down as well. As you know, walkability can be very easy and explained with 3 words, or you can have 200 words to explain what makes a city walkable. So within the place under study, we can look into the built environment, and your policies are reading your policies, and all of them talk about some part of the built environment. It could be at street level, pavement, crossings, street furniture, so on. It could also be at the district or city and country level, even things like land use, walking and public transport integration, and so on. That would be a built environment. Natural environment, very different weather from the study areas, from Greece to Finland. So the natural environment also is a determinant. And once again, they all influence each other. So you have the built environment would be the mitigation, the protection from the weather, and the other way around. Socioeconomic environment, people in the street, you can have the nicest street ever, and if it's empty, it doesn't really look very pedestrian friendly. And then the transport system, and this is very good for your cases, most of your cases, because you're doing some sustainable urban mobility plans, and you're integrating all the mobility, and then looking into walking. So obviously walking is not an isolated activity, and it relies on other means of transport. It's affected in a positive and in a negative way from different means of transport. So these are the main 4 things that you need to understand in your built environment. Then when you go to people under study, and Jim is going to talk a lot about that, is the importance of the people, having people in the center of the framework. And demographics, so age, gender, but also personal abilities, ability to move, ability to interact with the public space. That will also have a huge effect on the pedestrian experiences and behavior later on. And attitude, social norms, car-oriented places, places where the car is a status, social status, and only poor people use their public transport or walk. These are all things that also influence what you're trying to do. It's not only about pavements. And then the walk context, the purpose of the walk, the company, the familiarity with the place, and also difference between the day and the night, especially for safety, seasonal differences, for weather as well, and for the purpose. Once again, some of you are specifically looking into walking for modern physical activity, and that might require a specific built environment. Others are looking into walking as a means of transport, others as a social economic activity, and so on. So it's all things to have into consideration that will eventually influence pedestrian experiences. And this is what we have in the middle of the framework, pedestrian experience. So basically, for a person to choose to walk, for a person to be able to walk, the place should be, or the walk should be feasible, should be convenient, accessible. So these are all the terms that we are going to discuss today, these days, and during the next 2 years and a half, probably. How to measure them, how to assess them, how they interrelate, how they're more important for a specific population or for specific purposes, and how, when you get the right mix of pedestrian experiences, then is when you go to the pedestrian behavior and you eventually have more people walking and more people choosing to walk. Just moving to, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I talked for too long. Yeah, I ran out of batteries. We wanted to give you a holistic approach, an overall view of how the complexity of walkability and how to narrow down into the visions and the activities.
Crazy.
Squeeze. Still there?
Okay, now it's working.
Yeah, that was it.
That was
Yeah.
just a hiccup.
So just the last one was that all these things that matter are moderated by policy and planning, and this is your role here. So the green part is what you have the power to influence. You have the power to influence in the place with some interventions. You have the power to influence in the people with some campaigns, taking into consideration their needs and their concerns. And you need to understand the purpose of the walk in your places, how people walk and why. And that will give you the vision that Jim will talk about. How it was.
I know, that's great. So there is science behind this, but it's easy to get confused, because we already show a lot there. And ultimately, we're talking about commitment in a second, and we have to sort of think, if we're talking to someone and trying to get them to be engaged in this area, how do we explain this? That took 10 minutes. This process has already taken us half an hour. And we haven't even started talking about people and what they want, particularly. And so, we have to be careful to keep it accessible in some way. Oh, this is now going to get stuck each time, sorry. And our challenge is to get this communication right. The good news is we've looked at a lot of documents. There are a lot of things that influence already that have been written by important people who know what they're talking about. We've already decided if we want to sort out road safety or physical activity or make sure that the way that we design our spaces is gender inclusive, think about including people with low incomes in the way that we build our urban centres in the future, the International Charter for Walking, and even soon to be released in Portugal in October, the Pan-European Action Plan, the Master Plan for Walking. It is hot. It's almost untouchable. It's so imminent. These documents have already put together big brains and decided if you want to achieve these things, this is what you have to do. You know what we found in these documents? We already found 149 actions that you're meant to do. And we found 69 indicators that you're already meant to be using. No wonder you're tired. We have to be really careful that we've made it quite complicated. It's difficult, but actually maybe it isn't so difficult. Because if we think about what is a policy, and this is the bit we want you to take away and to reflect on, if you were starting from scratch, I'd say follow this. Vision, goals, objectives, actions, measures, outcomes. And you could put together a policy if you needed to, and countries have, let alone cities have, within 6 weeks for walking. And that's encouraging, because I think if you haven't got anything yet and you've all got something, but if you really want to sort of make sure that you've got the best, then let's think about that. 6 weeks, give yourself a 6-week window and start putting it together and seeing what it looks like. You can always add to it. And this is what I want to help you with, because this is a formula here that connects each step along the way. I shouldn't call it steps because we've got our 8 steps, but it's a framework. And it's a logical one. And my starting point, I would suggest to you, is that we always start with an experiential vision. Because I've seen lots of strategies that say we're going to get ourselves better organized, or we're going to make sure that the system supports, everyone making the right choices. But ultimately, if you put people in the middle, no one's going to argue with that. Have you got a politician where you work, a big leading question, who wouldn't say, I want that? Everyone has a safe, easy and enjoyable walking experience. Why wouldn't you want that? And the challenge is you can make it more complicated than that if you want to or you need to. But ultimately, when it really boils down to it, that's what I would suggest, our starting point of what we're looking for. And you can think about it in terms of turning such a vision into a series of goals. Let's think about breaking that down. If you looked about safe, easy, enjoyable, just 3 terms. There's lots of other things, and as Carla showed, there's a longer list that we could think about. We could add all of those things into that list, but it then becomes you run out of breath before you finish your vision. And ultimately, if we're talking about safe, free of risk from being hurt. Activity, everyone's walking regularly. Accessibility, everyone's able to reach public transport and other key destinations on foot. Comfort, everyone has the space and facilities to support their needs. And ultimately, satisfaction, that everyone perceives walking as a positive experience. And I would suggest that this might be a helpful starting point to either just reflect whether your policy has already ticked all of these things, and we've got thoughts about that, or whether actually there's other things that you might want to also add in here. But if you've got that right, we're probably a long way off. We're a long way ahead. And you can turn that then into objectives that says, okay, what do we do? Well, we're going to increase the number of minutes walked per day. We're going to reduce the number of people being killed and seriously injured. We're going to make sure that more percentage of people are within easy reach, convenient reach of public transport. We're going to make sure that the facilities actually improve with the infrastructure, and we're going to make sure that satisfaction increases. That means that we've actually got to ask these things. Of course, we've got to come up with a model for it, but that's our objectives. And there are clearly some actions that everybody could take, and we've got 20. And it's interesting, we were talking to Portugal, we talked to several cities, and they said, in Greece, they've got 198 actions. Greece isn't here, so I won't exhaust it with 198 actions, but 198 things they can do for walking, and I'm sure they're right. But what they told us in Portugal was when they did cycling, they came up with 53 actions. And they realised once they got to number 20, they'd run out of time for their meeting. They couldn't actually report that many on a regular basis. They said they just haven't got, they've only got 2 hours every quarter. That's the reality of how we're all busy. So they said, from now, when we write the walking plan, we're only going to have 20. Sounds good to me. That's a good number. If that's the reality, then we can't actually do 53. Let's do 20. And so there are actions that are around supporting, encouraging people to walk. People is at the centre of this vision. Think about that, and we can get into this detail, and we will get into the detail. There's also actions that create safe, easy, and enjoyable places. So we've got people in the middle, the next circle out. is about places. A few more things to do there. And then we've got actions that need to embed walking into the process, policy process. So there are things in our machinery, in our system, that we need to improve to make sure that walking gets embedded. And when you put it like that, I hope you can start thinking that, okay, 20 things, you can probably sell that. You know, we're talking about commitment here. And I think what people want to know right up front is like, so how big is this thing going to be? How many things are we going to have to do? How much do you think we're going to have to spend? And how long is it going to take? And we've got some thoughts around that, or we could at least share with you some examples of what people have done. But we've also, helpfully, I hope, because you know this has only come out within the last 6 months, but we've thought a long and hard with some real experts around there about how would we measure that. And interestingly, before this, we had a different version. We had actually some 36 indicators that you could use. You know, remember I said all those documents had 69. We boiled it down to 36, and we thought we were doing really well. But actually, people said we still haven't got any money to measure. We actually haven't got a lot of money locally to put things to actually measure these things. So we looked at existing data sets that are being measured, often already by cities and regions, and said, let's look at that through a walking lens and use that data to give us an insight. And it may not be enough, but it's a starting point. And there are 5 things that we can do. And if we really only had to measure one thing, which one do you think you would measure first? If we could only measure one thing from here, activity, safety, comfort, accessibility, satisfaction, what would be the one thing that matters most? Safety? Any other thoughts? Satisfaction? Satisfaction. I would say satisfaction. The thing about safety is often it gets underreported. You know, we talk about safety and security. It's so vital to get right. But actually thinking about people's perception of safety might be just as useful as whether or not you're being hit or killed or injured. You know, if you sort of think, actually, I don't feel safe enough to even go down that street, then we've missed all those people if we waited to see the number of people who've been hurt. So, I mean, it all matters. It really does. But if we only had to do one thing, I would say, let's just measure satisfaction. But how many people measure satisfaction yet? Actually, around the world, the only thing we can measure is safety. Almost everywhere. And so this is our challenge. It's great that you said those 2 things, because this is where we are. We've got safety data. We need to understand satisfaction. And when we're talking about commitment, you know, this is all only step 1. What we're needing to tap into is a language. So there's the same vision right at the top there. Everyone has a safe, easy, and enjoyable walking experience. But here comes the political bingo. To mitigate climate change, support public transport, reduce pollution, benefit public health, create vibrant, inclusive, equitable societies. Now we're talking. This is the language that probably your politicians are much more familiar with. There are portfolios around this. There is budgets for these things. There's ministerial strategies probably for things like climate change. I never thought about how to connect walking particularly to climate change, but we can. And actually, here's 13 Sustainable Development Goals where every single country apart from North Korea has already said that they're going to do all these things. And I promise you that if you get this right, this walking policy, we will be able to accelerate your delivery against all 13 of these in a more affordable way than probably you're spending money and committing budgets at the moment. So it's quicker, more affordable, and most importantly, and this is a new language that is helpful to share with people, it's a reliable investment. You know, if you invest in this, it's much more likely to deliver on these things. So we're having to adjust to the language, to the priorities, to what we might call the political currencies. These are the currencies that I'm aware of at a global level. You'll have your own. It may be that there's something really strong around the economy. You know, we talked about here already about quality of life and also about enlivening the town centres. You know, it's all about trying to get more life back into where people are living. So it may be that some of these are a bit bigger than others, but this is the sort of language where we can connect. And it starts giving us a sense of thinking, who do we need in the room if we think like that? And so some examples, and I've just got 4 or 5 here. Queensland, regional policy in, anyone know? My wife's from there, so I do know, honestly. It's Australia, the east coast of Australia. Brisbane is like the main city. And they wrote this very quickly. Within 6 weeks, they said, well, look, this is the sort of thing we want. And this was the sort of language that allowed communities to engage as well as politicians, but crafted by experts and a couple of consultants. It talks about more people walking more often. You know, planned streets, welcoming, safe, connected. You can see the language, vibrant, all ages and all abilities, attractive, easy, tourism, recreation, health. You know, you start pulling these words out and we start realizing who we need in the room, who needs to be committed. Because this is the sort of vision that for Queensland meant everybody, every word there meant we're joining somebody new up to the agenda and making sure that they're part of what we're about. Look what they did in Scotland. Another example. Basically, bang, what a statement. Scotland is a walking nation. You know, that's it. Boom. Burgenland is a walking region. Boom. Why not? But everyone has the opportunity to be active every day. Active, happier, healthier, greener. You know, this is a couple of years old, but that language, I think, still stands. Is that language your sort of language? Look at the people that they've had to engage. Each of those is a community of people that took them 6 months to bring round the table and recognise that actually, I can help you with your delivering of your agenda with, if you sign up to this. So a nice core vision that engages and embraces a wider agenda, puts it at the centre, and then makes the connections. Interestingly, you know, the spokes in the wheel, but you know, maybe it's the path connecting. London, enabling more people to walk part of their journey to improve the experience. Doesn't that make sense? We keep talking about that. And reduce car dependency. You know, they do all, and by the way, less cars. You know, they were bold to say that. Not everybody wants to say that. You know, we could just focus on the walking part, but maybe you are willing to go that next step and say, and, you know, we want people to choose to do more and drive less. And it should be, this is an interesting, you know, it should be, but maybe it isn't, but it could be the world's most walkable city. I've worked in Barcelona, Vancouver, Paris, London, well, Bogota, maybe 25, 30 cities who all said to me, when I went and saw the mayor, they said, yeah, we want to be the most walkable city in the world. I said, fantastic. Now we can get started. Because they've got a big, bold vision that says we want to be the best. You should be the best. Why not? You could say that. You want to be the best. What does the best need on most walkable? Who's making these lists? Why does Vienna win every year? Or Melbourne? What are they doing? And what does that mean for you anyway? We can discuss that over dinner. But look, where walking is the most obvious, enjoyable, attractive. But then they focused in on short trips. I don't think it just has to be short trips. There's lots of trips in London which are more than this 1K or the 500 metres that we're talking about in Burgenland. Why not much more? Lots of people in lots of countries are walking a lot more than that. Hong Kong is a final example here, I think. This one, I said we worked with them for 3 years, but they just said, we want to improve its priority. We're missing it. We forgot to include it. We've got to mention about it. And so we want it to be friendly. It has to be sustainable, urban, mobility, social, environmental, economic, health. That was an acceptable language that says, if you can deliver on against those items, we'll do it. And we don't mind how much it costs. So what it will come down to, and there's an exercise for you to either do tonight on your serviette over dinner, or you can take home and think about. But the challenge really is to think about who we engage, and whether they're already engaged, and whether they like you, know you, understand this, needing communicating, how we're going to present this. And what we found generally is that the most successful places have a mix of these types of people involved. It's helpful if you do have academics holding you to account, supplying you with the evidence and saying, yeah, actually someone tried that before, you know, according to research, and yeah, it never worked. I wouldn't do that if I was you. Or do we know that before we're actually going to spend a load of money on it? Or do we need to create some sort of baseline? So academics can be helpful with the evaluation, and your critical friends giving you advice. Advocates, people actually saying, yeah, I believe in that, or that would help me. That's helped my agenda. It might not be that you've got a pedestrian organisation who's sitting there asking for it. We'll have a few coming in a minute. But who are they? Are they starting with tourism? Are they angry pensioners? Are they people who maybe a loved one has been killed while they were walking, and they now really want to make sure that they change things? All of these people need to be included, but you know, people who are supporting cancer, diabetes, heart attacks. You know, there's a whole world of health there. There's a whole world of abilities of people with vision impairments, wheelchairs, people who are deaf, etc., who this is their agenda. It's our agenda. We need to include them and make them feel connected in this way. And practitioners, you know, we're talking about engineers, planners, health. There's a lot, actually. And if you've been to one of our conferences before, you'll know that we can have typically maybe a dozen, 20 different disciplines in the room. Artists, you know, all sorts of people. It's important to engage. And I left the last one as politicians to last, because we sort of assume that these are the people who are the ones in charge. Maybe they are. Maybe we need to. They need to think they are. But actually, we're empowering these people to say, actually, we've all agreed this is what we want, and we want you to support it. Someone said to me this morning, even, well, I'm not going to get a politician to support this, because what they're worried about is that it's the motorists who vote. It's the motorists who probably want to be able to park outside their house. And the moment you challenge that, I'm going to lose my vote. Right, we'll talk about that. We can have a conversation about that over the next few days, because I reckon if you collect the right information, come back to those goals and objectives, want everyone to be able to walk to school, you know, those older people who can't drive, we want them to be able to still go out, don't we? We want people, women, low-income communities, haven't got a choice maybe. You know, we want to create an environment where everyone's happier. I don't know that anyone's going to disagree with that. So we need to, if we somehow or other set it up as being a walking or car, we got something wrong there, right, early on in the vision. And that's why I'm trying to explain this right from the start. So it's an exercise we could think about. If you were honestly trying to sort of say, well, actually, politically, I'm a bit of a one. Or actually, I've got this terrible nightmare of a mayor. They're a 5, but I can't get any of the practitioners to pay any attention because it's all about the mayor. The mayor loves it, but I can't get anyone else to really sort of get behind it. You know, it'll be interesting. And we haven't got long now, but I'm going to come back to this slide and get you to maybe just share with me, share between you a little bit about where you really are. And I'd really be interested in your sense. You know, we're at the beginning of the project. Wouldn't it be great if we all filled in an honest sort of, you could just put it in an envelope and file it, and we'll bring it out at the end of year 2 and see whether we've gone better or not. But I'd love to have this for all of you and just give us a sense. It's just your perspective. But there are tools out there. You know, we can do that survey. We can do our own little internal thing. You went 2, or I need to be a 3, or actually I've got a lot of 5s, but the strongest one is missing. Tell us what it is. But there are other things. You know, we did this in 2005, we created this international charter for walking. We looked at, there were 35 different charters around the world. We wrote down all the things that you should do for walking. It was a lot more than 20. We've actually got 70 things in here. Illustrative actions, we call them. We put it in front of politicians all over the world. The darker the colour, the more signatures. But we've had 6,000 politicians sign this thing all over the world. And yet, have we put it in front of a politician and said, actually, I'm not going to sign it. I don't want that. Every single one has signed it. So it might be helpful. Maybe we need to craft it slightly differently, but you know, we have got this. And often they sort of say, well, who signed this already? We can tell you who signed it already, but it might be helpful to sort of just get attention, put in the door that says, you know, this is a big thing here. You know, 62% of the world have got a policy about this now since COVID. 6,000 people have signed this all over the world. We don't want to miss out here. I just did this for you, actually. I've never done this before, but it started me thinking, you know, when Carlos was thinking about socio-economic, ecological models, sorry. I thought, actually, we could probably map all your policies. You know, we could pop them down and actually think, you know, if this is the ideal on the left, you know, there's all the outcomes. I've got 23 or something. I've got 5 indicators. And there's the vision in the middle and the objectives. And then I've got these people in green actions. I've got blue actions for places. And then I've got pink actions for process. If this is what we want everyone to do, or that's our starting point. What have you got at the moment if we were to map it? If you were to map it? We'll think a little bit about this tomorrow, maybe. But it might be helpful that we print these out. And we invite you to sort of circle the ones you're doing and maybe highlight the ones that are missing. I just did that in Bergenland and showed it this morning. I didn't show it in a picture, but I went through it and I thought, well, yeah, you're doing about 20% of what you would think would be everything, you know, in the whole system, which is a pretty good starting point. But there's a bit of a shopping list of things that we could still do. And you might sort of say, actually, oh yeah, we are doing it, we just haven't put it in the policy yet. Or actually, no, that's never going to work here. But you'd have to explain why. But, you know, maybe this sort of model might be helpful. So again, we're talking about commitment, but I think if we understand the whole story and we know what we're committing to, it might help for us to think about how we're going to get on with these policies now. I don't want to wait till year 2.5. And look, other tools in the box. You know, I said we've been thinking hard about all that stuff around indicators. And we've got that top level, over here, priority indicator on the left here. Minutes walked, people injured, convenience, comfort, satisfaction. But behind it, if you're interested, is much more detail of things that we could also evaluate and measure. You know, the numbers of school children aged between 7 and 11 who are walking independently to school. If that's going to help you, and it might help Braga, and it might help Burgenland in particular, because that's a WHO indicator. World Health Organization, physical activity, Global Action Plan for Physical Activity says we need to understand that. Are kids walking to school or are they not? Are they active enough, or is sedentary behavior going up? It's a global indicator. So if you want to go and measure that, and you decide to adopt that rather than average minutes walked for everybody, we're going to focus in on school children, then great. So we've got all of this, and we can get into that detail, and we will get into this detail over the time. And the last thing to share with you, we've got 5 minutes left of this session. Thank you for those who are still online. Is the fact that we did a survey with Scotland about a year ago, and they found it quite helpful. And I wanted to suggest it to you as maybe something that we need to do to sort of create a bit of a baseline in your communities. We're talking about commitment. What we did in Scotland, and there's only 39 people, but imagine maybe you know 39 people in each of your places that we could engage, you could engage. And look who it was that they engaged. We thought about funders and decision makers, which were different from people who are out there delivering, who are different from the people who are actually participating or actually benefiting. the actual people walking, basically. So we didn't get an entire balance, you know, it wasn't 30-30-30, but these were the people who were interested in the Scotland policy. It would be interesting for you to think, who would you invite? But look at all the people. That's how they describe themselves, coming from active travel or health, environment, community, lots of different perspectives. And then we said to them, same 8 steps. Okay. Oh, first of all, we said, you know, the existing policy, do you think it's any good? Either, yes, it's been very effective, or it's effective, or still work to do, or actually, I don't think it's really cutting the mustard, as we might say. It's not really being that effective. No progress. So we asked them, based on all the things that you're currently got commitment. Imagine if we said this to you. Can you imagine you've got existing commitments in your policy? Is it working? Can you believe it? They had 25 objectives. I'm suggesting we only have 5, but you know, whatever it is, we can just ask them, are we doing a good enough job? Look what they said. This was after 5 years. Most of them were sort of saying, actually, we've still got work to do. We haven't really, okay, we've started, but we've got a long way to go. And then we went through the 8 steps. We could do this. Who's committed already? National, local, health departments, planning authorities, transport authorities. You know that thing I just asked you, 1 to 5? What if it wasn't just your answers, but we asked everybody who you know needs to be committed to actually share their perceptions of whether you feel they are engaged or not? And then, you know, remember the 8 steps. What if we got a baseline now that said, yeah, do we have data already around these issues, the sorts of things Carlos was talking about before? Why people walk, where people walk, the quality of the walked environment, rural versus urban, where people can walk. You know, there's lots of factors that we could put in a list here, and you could ask people whether or not you think there's enough data or not, because it's coming up. And step 3 about the tools. You know, do you think we've got enough of that? Have we got enough data, or that we could do a bit more of that in the future? Maybe this is a time for a barometer. You know, we're just getting started. Who's gathering the data? Thinking originally we might ask you this at the beginning of every session. You know, but if we do that on step 4, we ask you whether or not you've got any data, and it's we're a year in and we're in Vilnius. You know, I want you to move faster than that. Why don't we ask this now? Find out what data you have, or whether people in your community feel like you've got enough to be able to make this policy as good as it can be, or there's things that are still missing. Step 5. You know, are there policies that are being delivered? The strategy, transport strategy, health strategy, climate strategy, national planning framework, delivery frameworks, health prescribing, lots of things here. Is it having an impact? And just really, it's not that we're taking apart Scotland. And Rona, I'm sorry if you're looking at this online and wondering, why is he sharing all my laundry, my dirty washing around where we were in Scotland? It's actually just to suggest that maybe we could do a survey. We could do it maybe in all your languages. Maybe that wouldn't be too hard. Online survey, give everybody a link, 39 people each, find out what they have. So look, we can ask them those 8 questions about those 8 steps. Where would you spend your money? What do we do? Employment zones, schools and education sites, high-income communities, low-income communities. Maybe there's consensus out there about where the policy could be more impactful. That would be great. And actually, the next bit, of course, which gets us beyond a baseline, is we then said to them, how might you be involved in the future? We're going to have to ask these people if we want these policies to be more effective. Yeah, count me in the team, or I can lend some support. Oh, actually, this isn't my interest or my expertise. Let's find out who's out there and what people want to do. And indicators around safety, accessibility, comfort, you know, we asked exactly the things. But we also asked them the question was like, what about the barriers? Tell us, you know, why isn't it happening more? What are the things where we could do better? And look, all these things came up as being things that we needed to overcome in Scotland. You'll have your own barriers, but I think it's good to get them out. So I think maybe we can look at these policies. I've looked at this, you know, if you really want all the answers on one page, that's it. Take a picture of that quick. But, you know, create a vision about walking, goals, objectives, actions, measures, outcomes. Absolutely. Start with this. Add to it. Change your language, make it yours. But I want you to know that there are people out there all over the world. Africa, Asia, Latin America, we've just been invited to the Caribbean. They all want that. And it's exciting to think that what we're doing here together and what we're doing online together in this group is that we're starting to think, okay, so let's look at our vision, goals and objectives. Let's try and get that right. Let's look at who's committed and who needs to be committed. And maybe we do a baseline survey. Let's flush that stuff out so that it's not just our opinion about where we think we are, but we try and build a consensus so that the committed people come up with something. Because if nothing else, you can have a meeting with them all and say, look, the survey said, is that true? Or is it just a couple of weirdos that got in there and answered it 5 different times and made the results right? We're going to have to write some of this up. But I'm super excited to tell you everything that I know after 25 years, all in an hour, and hope that now that we know all the answers, we can then think about how we craft it, make it yours, make it relevant to you, and deliver it in your own way. You know, we're here to help adjust it. It's not going to be the same thing for everyone, but I think there are some commonalities here. And of course, we have to get ready for step 2, but maybe that baseline would help us. Thank you. Yeah, it's punishing to have to complete everything in an hour. I want to talk to you all a lot more, but just to be fair to the people online, those of you who've heard all this before. No? Oh, okay, that's good. It wasn't like that, it was like a clap. And great, Maria from Heraklion, thank you for joining us. That's really great that you could be part of us. We miss Stelios, but we're sorry that he couldn't come. But to be fair, it is raining here, so I wondered if he saw the long-term forecast and thought there's no way I'm going to Burgenland. But anyway, it's great that you could both join us. I guess we've got a few minutes for questions, so maybe if you have online, if there's anything like that we can talk about. We're very much starting the process here with everybody, but we're trying to be as constructive as possible. But if anyone's got any questions, you know, please, either online or Jose, you've always got something. But you don't have to. I don't know if we can hear you. You're on mute for sure. Hang on, maybe we have to do that. Okay.
Oh, now it probably works. Do you hear me? So thank you for sharing this compact work of yours. That really resonates, I think, to the work that we do in Rotterdam. I believe we can already tick a lot of boxes on the 8 steps. Our current issue is to get commitment for the next step, I would say, and Karen will probably discuss this with you in the coming days. Especially on the political side that has changed in the city of Rotterdam. On the level of practitioners, there's still a lot of belief and commitment. So that would be my main question: how to connect even more to the ones that are delivering the projects, and then how to arrange this support even better to also connect to the political side and maybe to be ready for the coming elections. They will already be in 26. So we might now do some work to get ready for the next steps and hope for a good outcome of the elections in 26 for the next steps. And also find some budget. That's another issue that we are facing. But I do not really have further remarks other than I want to wish you a lot of luck and joy the coming few days.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, and we'll be with you in Rotterdam before you know it. February, isn't it, or something? I think we'll be there, Steve. So we're looking forward to coming in and seeing everything that you've achieved, but also, as you say, some still concerns. It's not perfect, and we will need to resolve and come through this. You know, the thing is, we had a good politician. We wrote a strategy, everything was looking great, and then there's a change. And this is the thing, you know, we can write policy now that could be wonderful. But I worked in the National Department of Health and Transport at one point for the government in the UK. We had a change of government halfway through our policy. You might share this from an Austrian perspective. And they said overnight, they said, if it's not written in Arial font, size 11, it's going in the bin. And suddenly, everything that we'd written, everything that was there, ready on the shelf to go, was moved. They said, if it's not Arial, I'm not reading it. And it was such a, you sort of realise that actually sometimes politics can be that fickle. And yet, in the Netherlands, as an example, they've got good people who, even without the government for what, last 5 months or something, I guess, something like that, you know, they're actually writing a national walking policy. Without telling anyone. Because they want to be ready, and then how they pivot that, and how it gets sold, and how it gets promoted, and how it gets funded, will decide on who's in charge, but actually we know what to say. And so sometimes these things get written without everyone being engaged and committed. And I'm quite sure in Rotterdam, like in many places, you know already what you want to do. You know whether your policy is doing it or where it could be improved. But that's what we've got to craft and steer together. You know, the path is a bit windy, and sometimes it might look like we're going back a little bit, but we somehow then we have to keep looking forwards. And I haven't got your answers for Rotterdam any more than any of the individually, but I think we can support each other, I hope, on this journey. And as you might feel like suddenly you're ahead of others, you might then in a year's time be a step back. But half the world's having elections this year. So, you know, we're all in a volatile situation.
Very sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, we're done. Are we good?
Yeah.
I've got to think about time.
Yeah.
The very last thing
Yes,
I mentioned, you know, these study visits that we are planning are a great opportunity to involve stakeholders, bring them, let them be inspired by these discussions that we are having, especially the hard notes. So those, you know, really problems, but you can bring the people that already are engaged, but try to convince people that are not on your side till now, because it's a great opportunity that they are joining, they are following this discussion, maybe they take something with them, they change the way they're looking at stuff. And you have the stakeholder groups, you can pay them the travels. That's what this project is about. Bring these people.
Thank you. Time-wise, I think we're out of this. Thank you so much for joining us. Maria, it's great that you have been able to be part of this. Thank you so much. And Jose, and whoever else might be on the line, thank you for being part of that.